Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Don Spinks, Repatriation Commissioner for the Repatriation Commission of Australia, and it is my great privilege to be your Master of Ceremonies for this morning's Australian Memorial Service here at Lone Pine. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the veterans amongst us. If you are a veteran or a serving member of a Defence Force from any country, young or old, would you please stand? Gaziler, Teksheker, Ed Guriz. Lutfen Aya Karl Canoes. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for their valuable service. Thank you. Veterans, please be seated. A special mention also for our young men and women of the Royal Australian Navy, the Australian Army and the Royal Australian Air Force, the Australian custodians of the Anzac tradition. Wherever you are serving, we await your safe return. I will now broadly acknowledge our official guests. His Excellency, Mr. Miles Armitage, Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey. The Honourable Mika Fatiri, New Zealand Minister for Veterans. Ekbat District Governor, Mustafa Chift Chiller. Ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps. Air Vice Marshal Stephen Meredith, Deputy Chief of Air Force, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force. Major General John Boswell, Chief of Army, on behalf of the New Zealand Defence Force. Major General Gerald Strickland, General Officer Commanding 6th Division, on behalf of British Armed Forces. Veterans, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Here in this very place, 107 years ago, Australia's soldiers fought and died. We gather to remember those whose courage, endeavour and sacrifice gave rise to the Anzac legend. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand. Our service today begins with the mounting of the catafalque pole. Please be seated. I now invite His Excellency Mr Miles Armitage, the Australian Ambassador to the Republic of Turkey, to officially welcome you here this morning.
Good night and good morning. Here at Lone Pine, we gather in the largest cemetery in what was once the Anzac sector and the memorial to Australia's missing from the Gallipoli campaign. This cemetery is one of more than 20 that dot the small area of ground known as Anzac, that in 1915 was the scene of 8 months of bitter fighting. These cemeteries and monuments are testament to what this campaign cost families and communities around Australia. After the war, as the cemeteries were being constructed and the dead laid to rest in these permanent burial grounds, the families of the fallen were given the chance to compose epitaphs. They are simple, moving expressions of mourning, telling of a campaign that was both a source of great pride and deep sorrow. He died for God, King and country, say the words on the headstone of Private Stanley Pettit, who was killed here at Lone Pine on the 8th of August 1915. It is a sentiment echoed in Great War cemeteries from the Middle East to the United Kingdom. People everywhere grieve for the fallen while finding solace in the belief that they had died in a noble and worthy cause, a cause held dear by most Australians early in the 20th century. Many others reflected on the lingering absence of a partner, father, son, brother or friend, farewelled to war, never to return. Private Albert Fox was killed in June 1915. The depth of his parents' anguish echoes across the decades. Oh Albert dear, we miss you, here from the home you loved so well. There are similar memorials on every Australian First World War battlefield, reminding us that behind the figures so often recited to convey the terrible toll wrought by this conflict are the stories of individual lives lost and of communities and families left bereft. For most Australian and New Zealand families, Gallipoli was beyond reach, too distant and too expensive to visit. But during the post-war years, some were able to come here to see the grave of a beloved relative or friend and to witness the battlefield on which they fell. Today, a different impulse moves us to visit this place. No one with a memory of that campaign remains, and the number of those who knew a Gallipoli veteran dwindles as the Great War recedes farther into the past. We come here in a spirit of respect and curiosity, seeking to walk on ground that has been revered by Australians since 1915, and to pay tribute to those first Anzacs, their allies and their brave foes. The Great War and the Gallipoli campaign now lie far in the past. At home, we are reminded of their profound impact through the monuments and memorials that can be found in every Australian city, town and village. Here at Gallipoli, monuments, cemeteries and epitaphs personalise the price paid by communities and families across Australia, New Zealand, Turkey and around the world in the contest for this peninsula more than a century ago.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Our commemorative address this morning will be delivered by Air Vice Marshal Stephen Meredith, Deputy Chief of the Royal Australian Air Force.
In early August 1915, the Gallipoli campaign was 3 months old. Thousands of Allied soldiers had been killed or wounded since the landing on the 25th of April. Thousands more were ill, too ill to be in the trenches, yet they were loath to leave the peninsula while their mates remained. Though the garrison was weakened by disease and exhaustion, August began with the hope that a new offensive would break the stalemate at Anzac. This offensive began here at Lone Pine. More than 2,000 Australians and 7,000 Turks became casualties here. The men who garrisoned this position in the weeks and months after the battle lived among the dead. A light horseman wrote in September, "We are right in Lone Pine now, and the stench is awful. The dead men, Turks and Australians, are lying buried and half buried in the trench bottom, in the sides of the trench and built up into the parapet. Dead men, sun-dried, lie all between the trenches. A dreary outlook. It seems the end of the world." Such was the nature of conflict at Gallipoli. The ground on which the Anzacs stood was violently contested from the campaign's first moments, and though Lone Pine was captured, the Allies' objectives on Gallipoli remained beyond reach. In this place the Australians called Lone Pine, and that the Turks called Canley Surt, which translates as Bloody Ridge. A relationship was forged between the Australians and the Turks. On the battlefields of this peninsula, despite the suffering and destruction of the campaign, our soldiers developed a respect for their Turkish adversaries as soldiers and as men. The Australians appreciated the Turks' courage, fighting ability and sense of honour. Private J.J. Ryan of the 4th Battalion, whose name is inscribed on the plaque behind me, referred to the Turks as good, honest soldiers, brave, and were not afraid to die. Second Lieutenant E.W. Bartlett of the 11th Light Horse said the Turks fought very fairly, and like us, were honest troops. Private Alan Salverson of the 23rd Battalion, who landed soon after the Battle of Lone Pine and was sent to hold the line here, wrote, "They were very good fighters and very fair people. Our one-time Turkish adversaries are now our friends. They care for the Anzacs who lie in this place as if they were their own, and for that we will be forever grateful." Today, we honour all those who fought and died here, and all those who lost their lives in the early campaign of a war that shaped nations and the world through the century that followed. As we gather here, we first honour the fallen of Turkey, fighting on their own soil, dying in defence of their homeland, inspired by the indomitable leadership of the man of destiny known to history as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. We also recognise and honour our Australian fallen in this place. Despite overwhelming odds, they held their ground until Anzac was evacuated 4 months later. Their courage, determination, self-reliance and mateship did not suddenly appear in this place. These qualities were already part of the Australian character, forged by a hard land and a young nation. Here on the Gallipoli Peninsula, their character became the Anzac tradition. And at the heart of that tradition lays a commitment. It is a simple but deep commitment to one another, each to his fellow Australian. In that commitment, I believe, lies the enduring meaning of Anzac. Then, now, and always, lest we forget.
Thank you, Air Vice Marshal Meredith. I now invite Principal Chaplain Darren Yench on behalf of the Australian Defence Force to deliver the prayer of commemoration.
As we pause to remember, many people of faith turn their thoughts to prayers. If you desire, join your thoughts with my words as I pray in my Christian tradition, or in silence, reflect in your own way. And so I pray. Lord of eternity, God of the ages, in this sombre and poignant place we pause today to reflect on and remember before you the tragedy of the battles that occurred here in this sacred place, Lone Pine. Soil sanctified by the blood of many young lives. We remember before you the young Australians, indeed all who were here, and gave their lives, their futures, even unto death, in defence of their homes, their families, their nation, or a cause close to their heart. We remember them. We commend them again to your care. They were far from home, far from country. Now they rest in peace. As we recall their legacy of devotion to duty and of sacrifice, make us, we pray, a people zealous for peace. We commend to you with indescribable thanks all who gave military service to the needs of their nations across the century since, those currently serving in our defence forces, and those in harm's way this very day, wherever they may be. Give every one of us the grace to live our lives in a spirit of justice, of mercy, of generosity and peace, and so reflect your will for our world. I pray in the name of the Prince of Peace, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Padre. Wreaths will now be laid by official representatives. To acknowledge the bond between Australia and New Zealand and the significance of the Anzac tradition, the first wreaths will be laid together by His Excellency Mr Miles Armitage on behalf of the Government and people of Australia, and the Honourable Mick Arthur on behalf of the Government and people of New Zealand. The next wreath will be laid by the Ekabat District Governor, Mustafa Chift Chilo, on behalf of the Government and people of the Republic of Turkey. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Republic of Austria, the People's Republic of Bangladesh, of Canada and the French Republic, by Consul General Joseph Saigar, His Excellency Nosud Manan, His Excellency Jamal Fokar, and Rear Admiral Jean-Emmanuel Gaudeluz. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Federal Republic of Germany, Hungary and the Republic of India, by His Excellency Jürgen Schulz, Colonel Andras Gergely and Mr. Gaurav Gandhi. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of Ireland, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the Republic of South Africa, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, by Her Excellency Sonia McGuinness, Captain Mazhar Bashir, Colonel Albert Truter, and His Excellency Sir Dominic Chilcott. The next wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Defence Forces of Australia, New Zealand and the United Kingdom, by Air Vice Marshal Stephen Meredith, Major General John Boswell and Major General Gerald Strickland. The final wreaths will be laid on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and all veterans of Australia and New Zealand, by Director General Claire Horton, Mr Paul Richardson and Lieutenant Colonel Ian Brandon. It is now time to reflect and silently remember all those who have served and died in all wars. Please stand for the Ode of Remembrance, which will be followed by the last post, 1 minute of silence and rouse. The ode will be recited by Warrant Officer Ivan Petrovic, Warrant Officer Ceremonial, on behalf of the Australian Defence Force.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them,
We will remember,
lest we forget.
lest we forget. Please remain standing for the national anthems of Turkey and Australia.
Yıldızı
Please be seated.